What's good, guys? Welcome to the second episode of the TCG Corps podcast. Yes, we kind of have a name. They could change again. I don't know. But I'm joined today by Dan and FrollyCat. And Nats just happened. I'm just gonna jump straight into it because I was there, whatever. Got to meet Brady, Pat, and some other folks. Nats just happened, and do you guys have any initial thoughts off of what performed from the top 4 list? Or top 16, top 32, all that stuff. I just don't want to take over immediately. So do you guys have any thoughts from the list that we saw from Nats? Whoever wants to stick to 4 first.
I think to nobody's surprise, Black War taking down the whole thing. What I think was interesting is, the fact that we had such a close finals. I don't know for anybody who watched it. I was definitely watching it, how close the finals were for Black War against Crossheart. And, how, granted, there wasn't as much representation, of course, as Cross as there were, Black War stuff, but the amount of representation across the entire field, when you look at both days of Crossheart, that was what was interesting to me. Because personally, I know you guys know this because I've been preaching it, how Crossheart I felt was aside from Black War, was that sleeper pick. I felt like it's a very low maintenance type of deck. Sure, it's got its combos, but the deck is, I feel very underrated. And I think it showed out with that, with the additions of Cross 7. I saw a lot of people playing Mervamon in it, which was huge, and a couple other little spicy little techs. So, I think it was interesting. I think for, if we're just talking North America, what I think was interesting was, and I know we'll talk about this probably in a little bit, but the lack of representation in North America of Grandis. Grandis didn't seem to be kind of anywhere. I know there's a lot of people who brought it, but it just didn't seem to crack anywhere near the top. So that I found was interesting.
I feel like I not only agree with that, but I was more surprised by the stuff we didn't see. I was expecting to see Blue Flare. It's just a new blue hybrid kind of deck. It seems stunny. It seems annoying. I imagine Crosshearts doesn't have trouble with it, though, with being able to tuck out from under tamers and stuff, or not losing their pieces because they get recycled. I do like that across the way you really see the difference in how every region plays, and what we value. Versus aggression, versus safety, versus even amount of tamers or options or Digimon really vary from quite a few of the decks. And I wish I could have seen a top 25 for North America, because my scope is limited as to what I've seen besides people posting their deck lists, obviously, after the fact. So I would love to see that pie chart. I'm sure we'll get later with the percent of who played what in the top 25 or 50.
Yeah, I agree. Looking at North America and seeing the amount of Black War Gray, that didn't surprise me. What did was the amount of variation between the three. As you saw with the tournament winning deck, they were running the promo Black War Gray mod. And I do remember people in my chat and other people's chats kind of asking that question about, have you ever thought about this? Because that could be a really interesting thing. And my immediate thought was, that seems I don't know, but apparently it worked. It won, and it was just, it's interesting to see what people valued across the 3 Black War stacks, and then the 1 Crossheart. That actually surprised me, because I didn't really think that Crossheart would make it that far. I figured it'd be top 16, but number 2 was quite surprising. Because in all the testing that we've done as a collective here, or watch people play, it's always holy shit, Crossheart beat Black or Greymon, and it's a surprise, generally speaking, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm also curious to know what that person's match spread was. How many Black Wars did they play? When did they play Black War? I'm just curious to see what their spread was. Not to say that they coasted, but just curious to see what other matches they played against, because I feel Black War is the only thing in this format that's the boogeyman for that deck. Everything else is kind of whatever for the most part. So yeah, no, that I agree with you guys. It's an interesting spread, especially in North America.
Well, to tack onto that point too, and I don't know specifically because I haven't done a deep dive, like Frawley said, without having that whole breakdown of who and how they progressed, and because the the day 1 to day 2 progression still kind of like something I'm adjusting to from other games and things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
but just knowing, regardless of who it was and who piloted it, on day 1, Crossheart was the only undefeated deck left. Crossheart went into day 1 as the number 1 deck. So when you consider that after an 11-round tournament for Crossheart to go undefeated, regardless of matchup spread, I agree with you, Sid, that if you only play one Black War and you get to luck out against that one, it's not really indicative of the deck's power level. But at the end of the day, 11-0 is 11-0.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do think that's makes a pretty decent statement for where Crossheart is headed. And we all know with Frontier and everything like that whole story arc and everything in the canon and all that, like Crossheart's not going anywhere. You know what I mean? Like it's that's going to be an archetype we're going to see. I'm not, without looking too much into, I know there's more support, already slated in upcoming sets, even if it's minimal for now. It's like Crossheart is just that deck that's just going to kind of always be there, regardless of its representation. So yeah, I think that's interesting with that. I think the other thing too that I was kind of curious about was, and I don't, again, maybe without seeing the actual numbers, I don't remember seeing too much Melga. Hardly at all. I saw more Beelstarmon than I saw Melga being showcased at this thing. So yeah, it was interesting seeing like probably you made a good point. Like what different, like the different regions and what they value more, or what they kind of decided to go with, what they felt was their safer pick, or versus what we have seen, whether it's just in locals or Ultimate Cups regionals that we have been doing for the last year, and what has been the most prominent to just basically see this kind of real big shakeup at the 11th hour going into Nats was kind of interesting.
I feel like on paper, we see Black War Greymon and we see that it has Tamer Hate, and we go, okay, cool, this is great against Shoutmon and the whole Crossheart thing. And I wonder if this is just something that like makes sense on paper, but in practice is just too quick. Like games just get away from you. It gets free checks. We have X3 now, which can come out even quicker, and you get like an extra. It's almost like having X4 was the one hit originally, so it's like having another X4, but it does have the option of blowing itself up. Yeah, I agree with you. I wonder if Beelstarmon was one of those. Like we saw some rogue decks running around that were just like hoping to like take some people by surprise. Not to give away too much about like the rest of the results, but my biggest surprise for these top 4 decks, there is no Death Xmon. Among these top 4 decks, there's no Death Xmon. Everyone's been whining about it. I've been like a victim of it. Like everyone's been hit with it. I bought an alt art because it was the only one I could get my hands on. But that I think surprised me the most. Where I was like, I didn't see one of. It's a one of. You didn't put it in this deck. I love the promo Black War Grey tech. People do theorize, but I think it's just like original starter deck War Greymon. People were like, oh, with the X antibody, that'll have so many sources, it'll get so many checks. I don't think people looked as well at Black War Greymon and went, oh, if I have 6, that's the 4 swings, like my natural and then +3. I can't believe that wasn't more run, but I also love it that it probably wasn't consistent. Like, it was consistent enough they ran 2. Like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like when you look at that one compared to the BT8 one, even in the version of Black War that I play, there's so many times like, damn it, I want to go into this Black War, but I'm going to pass turn. I don't want to pass turn. I do want to eat your tamers, but like, I don't have the memory to do what I want to do. So if you have to choose between the two, I can totally see why you would use the promo one, because it's a 3 cost. You're not running Nokia, so you can't reduce the cost. So like, it makes sense. It's just that like, I never would have thought to commit that much to it, and I can only imagine how much testing this person did with that deck. Because even Dan, you'd mentioned I had watched it to the game of the finals, and it was interesting. The commentators were talking about a lot where the Black or Greymon player throughout the tournament was very strategic in the use of his cards. They was very like, I need to secure the victory, kind of like me and Dan have these conversations all the time about why something may appear to be a play mistake when it's like, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't gonna lose, and in doing so I got overly cautious. And it was interesting that like how that play style for that person's deck really seemed to make all the difference compared to other Black or Greymon decks that were seen at the tournament.
Yeah, and I think that's why that promo Black War plays so well into it. It goes back to Black War not being this linear, grandest type Melga type of deck. It's very versatile in that in you know, for one, yeah, you have all the different top ends you can run, but in the way that you play it, and just the pilot themselves and how they decide to maneuver matchups, like Agent, like you were saying, is, you know, this person wasn't trying to really control his opponent's board state. He was trying to more so set himself up by being able to maintain the control on his side. Yeah. And that promo Black War is able to do that because, like Frawley said, you can swing so many times in a single with a single stack that you get so much value off of it. You know, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to go into this BTA Black War, sure, I'll pop a Tamer, pop a level 3, whatever, but then it passes turn, and now I'm just kind of like, okay, I hope you can't deal with my guy.
Yeah.
So I definitely think it's interesting, and you know what's great about it too is, on a little bit of a tangent of you know, no rotation so far that we have, like, in this card game, that cards like this that haven't seen play in, I mean, gosh, over a year at least now at this point. I mean, who's seen a promo Black War? That it comes back, not only, you know, plays a significant role, but then wins the whole thing. You know, I do. I think that just, it speaks volumes to the game, and it speaks, like, really well to, you know, strategic deck building and things like that you know, these cards work really, really well together, albeit that, you know, it's the golden boy and the Greymon line, but yeah, I thought that was a really cool little thing.
Yeah, I think just a final touch to put on that, it reminds me of Paildramon from the starter deck, where you went into your Pale, you went into, after you did all your stuff and your combo and your fun, you went into your big boy, either swung or continued, and the the promo almost feels like a pumped up Black War Greymon from BT8, where it's like, hey, if I have Metal Gray under me, I'm going to punch 2 of your guys, I can control field and choose how many times I'm going to unsuspend in the turn, and then I finish turn by paying 2 and going into Xiaomon or Gaomon,
Gaomon or Black War X, yeah, and just be like, cool, I'm just going to delete your stuff.
And it costs me what, 2?
Yeah.
Well, a little side note, and I want to make sure I quote this correctly, but if I'm not mistaken, the new Metal Gray X, right? Oh, that's opponent's turn. Never mind. I was going to say too, it's interesting too that when it unsuspends, you know, it trashes everything. Obviously, it doesn't work too well with that, but, you know, being able to get all of those additional effects, like in the Greymon X Annie, the Metal Gray, you know, Digivolve and things like that, it's like, I can Digiburst all of my stuff with Black War as long as I did the Metal Gray non-Digivolve type of thing, you know, DP reduction, whatever, and be left with like a single X antibody source and trash everything else and still feel safe. So I think that's just a really cool little aspect to that card because of all of its BT element support that it got that, you know, you couldn't do before.
Yeah. You know, and something else too, in regards to Nats. So I guess I should also kind of talk a little bit about, like, so I went to Nats. It was like 20 minutes from me at the LA Convention Center. I went and played in 2 LCQs. They didn't go very well. The first one went okay. Obviously, I didn't get in, so it didn't really matter. But the first one, I ended up losing to Grandis, and all I can tell you is my pride as an Examon player was crushed in that moment, because a total misplay. So, you know, last podcast episode, guys, we talked a lot about, like, as a new player and, like, the difference between playing in person and playing on webcam. I will tell you right now, there are times when you play in person where it's much easier to get caught up in the moment of what's happening. You're so cognizant of people around you spectating, and, like, you can see people out of the corner of your eye making comments about plays. It will throw you off. Like, I forgot what that was like. The last time I played Digimon in person was April of last year at a big event. So, like, I totally forgot about, like, the random energy that can be in-person playing. So if you have only played Digimon online and you go to a real event, a physical event that's got hundreds of people, don't feel bad if you get overwhelmed at these tables, because sometimes it's just the energy is just a lot. So I made a couple play mistakes. It was whatever. So I did a second LCQ, made it to the finals, and lost to War Greymon X. And I'm not surprised by that. I always tell people, even if you're playing with Examon, like, as soon as they get out the new Omni X, you're kind of screwed, because it's such a big body. They have, like, 8 layers of protection or whatever absurd number it is. You're not getting rid of that card, and that's literally what happened. So I spent the rest of the time just chilling with people and doing side events. Ironically, in Latin America, War Greymon X, I think it was in Latin America, you guys can check real quick. I think it was Latin America. Or it might have been EU. Whatever case, it top forward, and I'm not surprised.
Yeah, it was Latin America.
It was Latin America? Okay.
Yep,
I'm not
yep.
surprised because that game made me go, damn, if I wasn't so focused on BT12, I would probably be playing War Grey X because the amount of protection you can get sometimes feels so much better than Black War Greymons. Just because it's like, I have 6 layers or whatever absurdity it is. Have fun trying to get rid of this Digimon. But
It was actually
yes,
both. It was EU as well.
EU as well?
Oh, was
okay.
There was 2 War Grey X's.
Yeah. Yeah. The deck's really good.
Yeah.
The deck's really good. But no, Nats was cool. If you guys get an opportunity next year to go, definitely go if you can. They had vendors. They had the whole Digimon like museum thing. So I got me a nice little special guidebook.
I'm jealous.
Yeah, I should have tried to get extra to send y'all, but oops. But it was really cool. They had like a museum. You go see the artwork. They had the premium Bandai store was there, so you could buy some of the stuff that was already out of pre-order. Like they had the Digivices that they were selling a while ago. They sold out, I think, within like the first day. But it was cool. So the event itself, even if you don't get in, it's definitely worth going, especially if you got buddies that are going to be there. Hop your ass on a plane if you can and go, because it was dope.
I swear you're so lucky I didn't win store championship this year, or I would have been coming straight for your couch. I had it in mind. I'm like, man, if I win, I'm hitting up Agent and being like, hey man, I want to go to Nats.
Dude, so for that was, I thought the same exact thing. Like with my whole like weird auto qual, I guess. I don't know if you want to call it or whatever. I was still, by the way, still on the list at the very end of there. I was still there. Registration had already closed or whatever, but I thought about the same thing. I'm like, man, I'll just throw Agent a little like room and board or whatever, and just like, but no, to your point, I definitely want to, maybe this is kind of a little segue into it, but do a lot more of these events, watching this stuff, via streams and watching, it was really cool how they had like the in-between rounds, like they had like the wide cam pans and everything, and you could actually see the event, and obviously being kept in the loop with all you guys that were actually in attendance. It's just like that's what like what Agent was talking about is that's the whole point of doing this. Like, yeah, it's cool we get to play and connect via Discord and webcams and all that. That's all cool, and you build friendships, relationships, and all that way. But the point of playing tabletop games is to play it in person. So the fact that these are coming back, and again, like this is what I was going to say, kind of a segue into seeing just the absolute health of what Nats was for this game, of over 1,000 people in attendance for the very first like real in-person like major. I mean, I know we've had regionals in the past year or whatever, but the online capped events within 30 seconds, that's not a real indication, because anybody can just sign up online. The fact that so many people from all over flew to LA to be there in person, it's just astounding to me. And it makes me really hopeful to be like, okay, this is definitely something. I was kind of like, not really on the fence, but kind of like unsure of where it was going. Yeah. But seeing that, I'm like, and obviously, like I said, hearing your guys' like in-person testimonies of like, man, this is crazy. The lines were, Agent, I know you said you were in line for, hours trying to get into some of these things. It's like, it's really cool to see, that Digimon isn't dying. We're not having a lull problem. It's just, where it's going. So yeah, I thought that was really cool.
I did watch, I can't remember what streamer it is. I'll have to see if I can find a link to it. But there was a couple people who were going through the museum with like just their phone out. And that was so cool to see, because I didn't even realize how many arts. I didn't even know the full scope of it. Tyrannomon from the very first set, BT1. I never knew he was at the ocean. It's just a weird blue background. How it's cropped and card text and everything. And I didn't realize I need to I'll find the name of the artist. There's someone I think I mentioned in the last show who's done over like almost 100 arts in Digimon. And I'm like, how many of them was that person? Yeah. Like, I know the Alter Gamamon was, I know the Canon Weiss one was, like, so I winning a ticket would have been the justification for going. But seeing everyone who went to Magic Philly and had a good time, seeing everyone who went to the Digimon championship, even if you don't get a ticket, if you're close enough to go, I attended a regional in Toronto, and it was part of a convention, and I just did it for fun. But even that level of, hey, we got 64 tables all set up, and like everybody's playing, and anyone can take home this tournament. There is nothing to like an actual competitive spot. Like even locals, though I love locals, and you'll have people watching you, and you can get caught up in things like that. Like there's nothing more than being like, oh man, I'm down a game, and this is a best of 3, and I only have so much time to win this game. And it's different. I can't wait to do it this year, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, it was cool. I mean, I feel like we could gush about Nats. I don't know why I said it with a weird accent thing there. I feel like we could gush about Nats all the entire podcast. But speaking about like archetypes, and we've seen kind of like Black War Greymons everywhere, War Greymons everywhere. What archetypes do you guys feel like are the strongest right now, and how would you game plan against said archetypes? Whoever wants to take the floor, go.
I mean, there's a lot to calculate for that, honestly, because even someone who's in contention right now, like I think we mentioned last episode, there's a Greymon every format. Doesn't matter if it's which War Grey it is. There is a Greymon every format, and their strategies change. So that's an archetype I feel like you're always going to have to prep for. So if that has new support out, you should be looking at what that's doing. But you always have to worry about things like Imperial Dramon. Like that's got new support coming next format. There's format Boogiemons like Quartzmon coming out that are going to shut down games and be really disruptive. Archetypes, though, I feel like as much as you should never count one out. Jesmon has been good. Will be good and has been good in the past. Like that is a trifecta. We know they have more support coming because they love that boy. Dan mentioned Crosshearts. Of course that's gonna get more. It's gonna be weird too with it being able to do blue flare stuff.
Yeah.
And like we'll see how much of the blue flare stuff is good and mix it over into the deck, I suppose.
Right.
But yeah, always like any series protagonist, any series antagonist, especially the protagonist, you should always be worried about because Emperor Greymon's coming and War Greymon's coming. So if it's from any of the main series, I feel like you have to expect it. We even mentioned last show, Dracomon. Dracomon wasn't always the best, but you should be holding on to some of these things if it's a boy who has like a good evolution in the future.
So
sorry, guys.
The first time we run over each other. No. So I was gonna say to kind of like clarify or to kind of dig a little deeper. So starting with like Black War Greymon, how would y'all play against Black War Greymon X as it is currently? And like, what do you think the pitfalls of the deck may or may not be? I can jump in first if you guys don't have immediate thoughts. But Dan, I don't know if you had.
No, I think you've got the most recent. I know you've been testing that one recently. Now post Nats and like trying to really dive into that one. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Maybe just piggyback off of what you have.
Sure. So I mean, for me, I think if I'm playing against Black War Greymon, I think one of its biggest weaknesses personally is that it only has one layer of protection, which this game is getting so many ways to remove things from the board that like oftentimes with the Black War Greymon player, they got one shot. If they push out too early, if they push out going to the Metal X too early, and they can't lock you down that turn, and you get another turn after they're no longer protected from D-Digivolve, which depending on the deck, like for me as an Xamon player, I don't really give a damn about D-Digivolve. Like that's not really protection. It's really avoiding the whole spinning and whatnot. But it's only one layer, and I feel like for me, that's where War Greymon comes into play. And I would argue in the War Greymon versus the Black War matchup, War Greymon X is probably better because it can last longer. It can delete you more than once in the same turn. And that, like, again, when you're playing against Black War, it's really looking for ways that you can double delete or you can force them to make a choice of, are you getting rid of your Black War now or are you getting rid of it later, sort of thing. That's my initial thought in game playing when always playing against Black War is like, how can I force them to use that protection when they would rather not?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think again, we always talk about like decks in a vacuum, right? Without certain matchups or whatever, just looking at them on paper, I 100% agree with that. I think I think although Black War does a little bit better on the board control side of things, because that's what it's trying to do, I think in just outright aggression and consistency and all that, I think War Gray X, straight red War Gray X, kind of edges that out. Just because, like AJ said, like all of the things that it can do and how consistently it can do it and how well it is protected against, other board states. So I think, again, going back to, still talking kind of about Nat's turnouts and results, whatever. I think that shows us, that the fact that across all regions, we had 2 different War Gray X decks top 2 different regions. We all knew Black War was going to be everywhere because it's, it was the new shiny thing, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody was going to be picking it up, and it's arguably one of the best decks in the format. But everybody was kind of counting War Gray X. I mean, when talking, in our circle and just close people other people that I knew that were going, they was either the Black War, it was Cross, it was Grandis. A lot of people were still on Melga. Nobody I talked to really brought up War Gray X. Mm-hmm. So I think that's it's indicative of the fact that you have these kind of like major Greymon archetypes, and this was kind of what I was going to say when we were talking about archetypes, kind of to tack on to Frolly's point is, I also think it's important that if you are really trying to metagame for whether it's events or, whatever, it's also important to pay attention to fan favorites, to for lack of a better way of saying it, cult followings, right? Like anything purple, right? Purple gets this massive following because of, you've had Beelstarmon most recently, you've had Lilith Loop in the past, you've got Merva Loop and things like that. Those aren't really, in my opinion, aren't tier 0, tier 1 contenders. They're good, but the reason they get so much notoriety around them is because so many people like them. It's just it's a a play style that people enjoy along with several others, and it's like those are also types of decks you have to watch out for, even if they're not maybe on paper like a Black War or War Gray X or things like that. People are going to play them, so you do have to kind of like be prepared for those as well, I feel like.
That's fair. To take a second swing at it, I'd always say Black War Gray as well. You're safest in the back row, but it does remind me of I have to beat this deck before it beats me. Mm-hmm. If you're a rush-based deck, you're going as to the walls as you can. If you have the option of building tower, you want to safely build tower. It's really annoying for Black War Gray to have to make the first move. Because Black War Gray wants to respond. I want to get the D-Digivolve. I want to punch something. I want to control. I want to do all this stuff. So making them have to go out first. If you go to level 5 and raising, and they're like, "Oh, but I'm already at level 5. Do I push out? Do I level 6?" Like, you put them in an awkward spot. They might tamer develop. You could tamer develop. I feel like you don't want to play into their main strategy, which is I'm controlling you. So you want to do everything you can in your safe zones, because you aren't safe on the board against any War Greymon, whether it be red or black.
Right.
Yeah. Something's gonna try to punch you. Something's gonna try to delete you by effect. I think if you're Rookie Rush or something similar like a D Brigade, or you're gonna go as hard as you can. And if you're a tower deck, you're gonna try to build safe. If you're BL Star, you're in trouble, unless you have a good way of bouncing it. It has so much protection. It reminds me of Alphamon, when Alphamon was very, very strong, and it was like, hey, I have no forms of interaction from you unless you want to de-digivolve me or put me into the security. And if they managed to Breath of the Gods instead, then you couldn't even do that. It couldn't be removed from play. So I feel like people love the idea of I'm safe from everything. Being safe from everything is great, but if it's limited and your armor only really lasts for a turn, you're going to have to. I mean, Black War Gray can be aggressive if it needs to, but I think you need to figure out how is this player going to play, and do I just need to try to outpace them?
Yeah, totally. It's a very interesting thing to see, especially when, like, I can't remember which region it was, but Eggman had it was like 80% of players, or whatever absurd number, maybe it was 60, were playing Black War Greymon, and that many Black War Greymons were being played, and that, like, there were so few seemingly by the end of it that, like, I think I brought up in a stream that I feel like with Black War, it's one of those decks where everybody picked it up, but very few people said, I'm going to master this deck. I'm really going to take the time to really learn it, learn how it plays, and make different decisions. I feel like a lot of people kind of just said, all right, cool, this is, I think, the best deck. I'm just going to go in and play it and see what happens. Because when I was doing my LCQs and other side events, you could definitely tell the difference between folks who have played a lot of Black War Greymon and who just bought the cards this morning and were here trying to, no shade to them, but like you could see like that the difference. I had played a guy who, I don't know if they had never played Examon before either, but it was Examon versus Black War, and there was so much like explanation where I had to explain their effects to them and my effects because they were just so confused by a lot of the interactions. And so, I think that like, that's another thing when you're dealing with some of these other decks is like the player really can make a huge difference because sometimes there's just like a knowledge gap and that like it's very awkward to bridge, especially in a real in-person event, because you have to kind of walk this fine line between like giving them too much information and also in hand-holding and also like trying to win the fucking game. I felt like that was my issue with Examon over the weekend of like, how much should I tell you? Like, should I remind you that this effect is here? Should I not remind you because I reminded you 5 times 2 turns ago? It's like this whole weird song and dance, which is a little tangential, but still.
No, but still really relevant into the like in the whole grand scheme of like what we're talking about, right? Because when you're talking about archetypes to be worried about and Nat's turnout, like everything that we talked about so far, all of that comes into play, right? Like we're talking about I don't want to, because I'm with you. I don't want to deep dive into like skill player versus non-skill player, new player, this and that or whatever. But there is a fairly glaring difference when especially too, you have to remember like BT11, albeit we had all been playing proxies for a while and all that, but the set official release prior to that was only out for a week.
Yeah.
So newer players who really weren't trying to test like we were or really cared about pulling proxies or whatever, they did. They picked up the deck probably a week before Nats, putted around a couple games, walked in, and then just did. And I know because I heard stories from some people that some people literally picked up the cards at Nats from the vendors and like finished putting their deck together there. And like you said, no shame to them. No, if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. But I think that because of that, it kind of puts Black War in this category of, yes, the deck is powerful regardless of its pilot, just because of the interactions it has, because of everything that it can do. But when you have, a field of 1,000+ players and a fair, without knowing percentages, a fair, margin of the field just playing it just because, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. You're gonna there's gonna be a lot of it that's gonna stick. You know what I mean? That's what's gonna happen. So I think to Frolly's point, and it's really cool that you provided that for us to be able to see like all the different tops of all the regions and stuff. That although Black War was gonna get its representation and all of that, it still shows us that there's still so much diversity in like what our metagame is, and the fact that if you do have a player who knows what they're doing or seemingly, there are really good decks to be out there,
I mean, just to dive onto that, I definitely agree. Like, knowledge is the main thing that's going to get you places. I always like to say, I mean, not say everyone can do it, but if you have the opportunity to play the deck, the format Boogeyman, if you got to play Black War Greymon for a bit, especially this variant, you really start to see where the holes in the armor are. With any deck, I like to build the decks I want to build, but I like to build one meta deck because I know it's what I'm going to be facing most. And I think it also ties into, we brought this up on the Black War Greymon player with the promo. That man did not just test against one locals or just against like one spot. That person probably played everything they could against it, and obviously played like the things they're going to see most, because like you're going to have a weird thing like Bloom Lord in bracket early on potentially, or Blue Flare or something you're not going to see later on in day 2, which is crazy. And I love the point about Black War Greymon. Like, it did see its representation, but it did not dominate. It was not top 4 at any of the event. It's not like it was a tier 0 deck, which is also kind of nice to see. It was strong. Those who could piloted it well, but it still had enough holes in the armor to be able to lose. I'd say studying a deck also gives you that format, because you learn where the choke points are, you learn where the pressure points are. If you're playing against like hybrid, you're gonna have to have safe checks. The weird one now coming out is with all this cross hearts representation. I expect to see cross hearts a lot more. Might be the matchup you need to learn next. Tapping people's tamers is really good. Quartzmon is going to be really helpful when he taps everything on the field and they can't go into their crosses. But yeah, I definitely think it takes a skilled player, but I like that there's so much deck representation. It doesn't seem like anything dominated. So you really could have learned what this meta was.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point too, like, looking at Crossheart, I feel like when you're playing against a deck like that, like, the answer is obvious, right? Deal with the Tamers, which is like, but only so few cards can deal with the Tamers, And it's a very, but the other side of that I've noticed, aside from Cross 7, and Dan, I think you've played the most Cross out of any of us here, what removal options does Crossheart really run? Like,
well, that's the interesting thing about Cross, right? Is that's not really what the deck is trying to do, and that's why I love it so much. That there's some people that'll tech in a random, a Wyverns or a Crimson Blade, whatever red yellow you want to do. I'll say this, and this is my hot take for the night. Sunrise Buster in that deck is absolutely terrible, because it is. And here's why: because I did not realize, and this is just Papega me. I didn't realize that it specified minus 3k for each red and or yellow tamer. I just thought it was you could play a red and or yellow tamer and then minus 3k for each tamer you have. Then the card would be busted, and I understand why it's limited. But it's only limited to red and yellow tamers. So it's like, okay, if I have a Taiki and a Kari and 3 Zenjiros out and a Kiriha or I'm only negging 6k. That's terrible. It's not great. So I'd much rather play a Wyverns or, like I said, a Crimson, a Gaia Force even. I'd rather play one of Gaia Force, I think with Cross now, and like you guys were saying earlier, the strength of Cross is how cheap everything can be played, the added consistency. Like, I wanted to tack this onto what you said earlier, Frolly, is we not only did we get Cross 3 and Cross 7, where Cross 3 is kind of in a way it's a watered down Cross 4, but if you think about it, it's a Cross 3 that you can still play for 1, like a Cross 4, that will have Rush because of your thing. It doesn't matter if it dies because you just save the sources anyways. And it also searches the top 3 and grabs you 2 more often than not. So in my opinion, I think it's honestly better, or at least on par with a Cross 4. So yeah, I think that's the strength of the deck. Isn't so much the removal aspect. I think Cross 7 is cute, and it's like it can do a lot of things. And if you play it, great. But I don't think removal is what you're trying to do. I think it's like Frolly said earlier. It's I'm beating you before you can beat me. And I try to just set up my board that way. I try to put myself in a safe position and just swing. Game's over. I think that's what that deck's trying to do.
I've noticed this with King Sukumon, which is a weird one to bring up, which is definitely not meta relevant. It does some funny things that actually interrupt really good decks really well. If you have no white, becoming white is really bad for you. Like, I can't go into like any of my guy because I'm not the right color. I don't meet color requirements, and you stall out a turn, which is weird. And the reason I bring up King Suka is it reminds me of the Chumon, where the Chumon cycling of like, oh hey, I had Sukumon in this pile, cool. He comes out, he comes back. It reminds me of the Crossheart. It reminds me of D Brigade. It's a rookie rush that has Armor Rush, I should say. It's a rookie rush deck that has conditional survival. I'm going to be able to recur my guys. I don't care if they die. I'm looking to just check shields. Like, I want a big spell to be in there and to die because I was going to material save anyways.
Right.
So I definitely see that, but it's interesting to see that like even a weird rogue deck can have a good archetype or like a good mechanic that can interrupt some decks. Yeah, Rookie Rush I feel like will always be around, and we've just now got different flavors of it. And Crosshearts just seems to be not only the most consistent, but one of the funnest ones to run. Like I never wanted to like it, and the more I ended up having the pieces and just laying it around, and I'm like, well, I guess I'll build one. Oh man, I've just played 4 games. Like,
yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it's interesting because every time I play against Crossheart, is like I feel like for me, because y'all know me, I generally play super aggressive decks that like knowing that there's no removal is like, oh cool, then let me just do my thing and just start like blitzing the shit out of the board, which is like an interesting. I guess my question for you, Dan, would be like, would that be the way for another player to try and like beat you is just to just like go as quickly as possible and like before you can set up, or because there's really nothing they should be scared of in security except for maybe like a cross 7, I guess.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to that is you're not necessarily worried about, as the opposing player, you're not really worried about removal, because most not only do they not play it, but they just can't fit it. You have too many tamers, you have too many cross pieces, which is understandable. It's what makes the deck flow. I think what you need to be more worried about with the swinging into security, unless you like have it kind of thing, is I gain resources and value off my tamers. If you swing, yeah, your guy might live, but if you give me 1, 2, 3 tamers over the course of a turn or two, you just helped me out and I didn't have to do anything. And on top of that, my tamers, unless you have like a Crimson Blaze effect, I know we've done that very rarely, but unless an effect like that is active, I'm dropping a body. And by the way, that body is pseudo protected because, okay, fine, you deal with it the same turn it comes out. I just save it under the tamer you just played for me.
Right.
So it's like you have and this is what I like what Frolly said. It's got a different survivability type of aspect to it. That yes, I'm not trying to remove your board. I'm trying to overwhelm your board to where you just have too much to deal with, and it's like I'll try to deal with this, but then you're worried about this, and it's like I think that's what Cross does so well is it's like this swarm effect. We saw it with Rookie Rush back in BT4, BT5, where they would just drop all these 2 costs, right? But when you drop a 2 cost, you're not gaining anything. I just drop a couple 2 costs, choke you at 1, and just you can't deal with it, right? Now I'm dropping, 1, 2 costs that search me decks, pull me stuff back from the disc or from the trash, plays down tamers, search, like I said, searches, rushes, all these different things. So like I think it's just, and I've said this time and again, it's just a better version of Rookie Rush because you're playing things for basically the same cost, but gaining an infinite amount of more value off of it. So yeah, I think it's just an overwhelming deck. I think it can sum up best of what that deck does.
The smallest point to add to that, I love that you brought up, not only are we helping you by dropping the tamers, but dropping a free body. If that body lives, it gets a swing. If I deal with it immediately, I save it. Like it's all the little chip ones you got to be worried about or like be protected against.
Yeah.
That's like I said. That's sorry.
No, go.
That's all I was gonna say is like that's the biggest thing about it, right? Is that whether you deal with the body or not that comes out, it's these little chip swings that, like I said, that's what it's meant to do. And again, it's so I know that we've played games where you do so well with dealing because you know how to like play against these this archetype, but there'll be so many times we'll have an interaction, you'll get rid of a body, I'm like, yep, just save, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's gone, but it's not really gone.
Yeah.
And that's the worst part about that deck. So
Yeah, it's part of me wonders with Red Black if Mega Dramon's gonna start coming back, where you can just like, cool, I swing, get rid of, just kill it, it's 3 costs or less. Because I know I've thought about retooling Black War again for like the millionth time to put that in there just to be like, no, we're just gonna eat the tamers every time we swing, because they're a nightmare. That being said, Frawley, you had brought this up in our Discord a little while ago about archetypes that not archetypes, but game mechanics, things we do not like to deal with. Frawley, what irks you the most?
Okay, I'm gonna be seen as a hater, but I'm gonna be fine with that off the bat. I hate stun. Tap me, de-digivolve me, bounce me. I hate the phrase, you cannot attack or block. I'm fine with it when it's a blanket effect.
Yeah.
Like Hex Blau that I can play around. I hate when it is a blue flare where I drop my Metal Greymon, I have 2 sources, everything on your board is stunned. Because if I can set up an early Sora Joe, I'm taking sources off you, I'm stripping you, I'm going to make sure that I have the right amount. The only thing I don't like about stun is it feels so oppressive, and I thought about this the other day. Normally it only affects 1/2 of a deck, so it doesn't super care, but things like Black War Greymon or things like the new All Force where we give ourselves blocker, you're denying my attacks on 1 turn and my blocks on 1 turn means you're really affecting me for 2 separate turns. Whereas like super offensive decks, they're like, okay, cool, I can't swing, that sucks, but I wasn't going to block you anyways. Super defensive decks are like, oh man, I lost my main mechanic, but I might not swing next turn. It's really weird to have a deck where it hits both sides.
Yeah.
But I think that mechanic is probably the one that irks me the most, because security Digimon I like as a mechanic overall. There are ones that are annoying, even like new Digicrossed. I think I've gone the full circle on it finally, where I was like, I don't really like this. It seems like you're just recurring your resources too much. Okay, they gave it to Dark Knightmon. This one's really fun. And now I've come full circle where I'm like, okay, it's a mechanic. It's gonna get put into decks, and I'm okay with it. But I think stun is my absolute number one with a bullet.
What would you? I'm trying to think of my own as I ask this question. What would you like to see? Like in like, how would you change it? Like, if you could say, "Hey, Bondi, change this," what would you ask them to do?
I think it would just be a blanket effect can be too detrimental if there's no play around. Holy Fire or Holy Flame, I think we see this a lot where it's like, hey, -1 check across the board. Even if you got raised, even if you're a tamer who wasn't in play for it, it's very strong. And I feel like I don't have a way of playing around it. At least with Hex Blau, when I know if I have a source I can swing, I have options of playing around it. Even if you're going to take my bottom sources, if I could put one guy on top, that guy's got to swing. I think I would just want a way of playing it, because we don't have something like, oh, hey, you're suspended next turn. Okay, but I have reboot. Get out. We don't have that for can attack or block. We don't have anyone who says, hey, I ignore the first time you give me a debuff, or like, and that could be way too good. But I just mean like we don't have something currently that can turn it off.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's valid. I mean, like, I feel like for me, like Blue Flare, and that is just probably because of the decks that I play, it's annoying, but not like as annoying. I know that I played a lot with Mikey, who has the Blue Flare. And like, I'm just like, well, I guess I can't do the full thing I want to do. I just can only put one Digimon out at a time, because it's usually just Examon, who has like 20 sources. So it's like, whatever, good luck stunning it. But I can see like for every other deck, like that just be a pain in the ass. Because it's like, yeah, like I'm even thinking about other things I play, like Jessmon. It's like, cool, can't really do anything there, because I definitely have more than 2 Digimon out. Yeah, that's interesting. What do you have any thoughts on that, Dan?
No, I was just gonna be an echo chamber here. That's my number. That's my number one. I think here's the thing. I think I'll play devil's advocate on both ends. I think it's a necessary mechanic because it does, I think, balance out certain meta types. Because if like Blue didn't have stunning, then Blue is like it's just not a good deck, right? In most cases, aside from like Amelga, right? Because you're not counting Imperial, you're not counting Examon as a blue deck. They're not blue doing blue things. They have they're on their own little wheelhouse, right? So I do, yeah. So I like stunning as a concept, but I agree with you, Frolly, that when there's just no way to play around it, when there's just a non-conditional, like, yeah, we're talking just Metal Greymon, but don't forget that you have the Decker Greymon that you put a Decker Dramon underneath, or already has one, because it's part of its cross requirements, stuns whatever you want. You have the male Bergermon with the Greymon that allows you to swing unsuspend if they have two or more. You just stun something else. So if you have like a perfect setup in Blue Flare, which is not too hard to come by with all the search and consistency that deck has, you could stun a board that's 4 or 5 wide. No blocks, no attacks, no nothing, and you're just sitting there with, I built up this entire board and I can't do anything with it. And so my board's just stuck here. They're gonna go back into their turn. Blue Flare is just a recycle deck, so it's going to do the same thing over again. So yeah, I think that being the biggest thing, because removal, any type of removal, like you said, Digivolve, straight up blow it up, Chaos Egg, you guys know, is like my my bread and butter, things like that. I think those are necessary evils in any game, regardless of how you look at it. When you have a game that has so much interaction between you and your opponent, right? Because that's just how it works. But I think effects that are so, and I've said this in other chats, and I voiced my opinion, I just don't like effects that basically just say you can't play the game this turn or next turn. Like, what am I doing here then, right? Kind of a sidebar. This is why, and I said, Agent, I said this to you a little earlier. This is why I can't play Yu-Gi-Oh! Because all I hear about is, if I go second, my opponent just sets up all these hand traps, and I'm just sitting there just twiddling my thumbs. I can't do anything. That's not why I'm there to play the game. It's fine if I have to strategize around something, but yeah, this stunning thing. I mean, that's why we had such a big problem with Blue Hybrid.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's I can't really, aside from stunning, I really can't think of another mechanic or something that's so oppressive or so just I want to say, what's the word I'm looking for? That's so toxic, I would say, within the game that I could point out and be like, they got to get rid of this. They got to modify this. There's really nothing else, in my opinion. I don't feel like.
Yeah, this is not a hate letter to Blue Flare players because I don't even think
No.
I like the deck. I don't even think it overly performs well. Like I think it's a good tier 2 deck right now. But when you talk about the history of it, of like, oh, we have blue hybrid. You had blue decks that were allowed to run 4 ice walls, like for a meta.
Yeah,
that's the only meta I quit. That's the only time I've taken a month off.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't that Nats last year though? That like, or was it what big tournament was it that the winning deck ran 4 ice walls?
I think it was one of the regionals. I want to say
Was
it was
it
like one of the big regionals beforehand.
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
That just goes to show like how bad something like that is. But to your point, Frawley, really quick, because you made a great point, and I didn't think of like I think the stunning aspect that Blue Flare does have is needed for that deck to be as relevant as it is.
Yeah.
Right? Because if it doesn't, that deck is non-existent. Nobody's playing it. That's the only real allure to that deck. Because if you want to play something that, I can rush and swing on suspend, just play Crossheart. Just play Crossheart, it's better. But when you add in the stunning effect of, now Blue Flare is a little bit more appealing, I'll try it out. So yeah, to that point I agree with. But as a mechanic, as a whole, it's definitely that.
Yeah, that one's frustrating. I'm trying to think too. Like, I think for me, like that's probably the biggest thing. But I also feel like I'm odd in that like not a lot of either archetypes or cards individually like bother me in the same way that other people get bothered by them. And that's probably from playing Yu-Gi-Oh for so many years that I'm like, I'm just happy to get to play the game, man. Because, in that game, it's like you can't do nothing. Because, like, I kind of want to shift over to something kind of like that I've talked about in my Discord a little bit about where do we think the ban restricted list is going to go after Nats? Because I've seen people saying they think Greymon X should be banned or restricted. I personally don't. Not because like I feel like the Greymon X, like the old Greymon X, is objectively better because 1 negate versus however many possibly you could have, like anywhere from like 2 to like 4. I've seen people talking about that being limited, which I think would be weird because then you shut down literally every X anybody deck from now until forever. And then Cool Boy, which I totally understand if it did, but again, I feel odd because like I don't feel incensed by this card doing what it does. Like I've seen other people feel very irate. Anybody have initial thoughts on like what they would like to see restricted, if anything?
It's really funny because Cool Boy, I kind of agree. It feels like that's the one that's gonna be hit to 1 because X antibody you don't wanna limit it because so many decks have access to it and you're only trying to punish a couple decks. But Cool Boy, the only thing I think that I would like, honestly, and people would hate it, but like if you eroded Cool Boy to 3 memory, I almost think that would balance it better. Just because 2 get back 1 immediately is too strong, but 3 get back 1 is okay. I might be wrong. I might not be balancing my cards right, but I feel like that's the easy one to hit. In my region, people are still crying about Melga. So I almost expect, so everyone keeps calling for the promo to be banned. But for anyone who doesn't know, Japan just made those promos legal. Japan didn't have those promos because they were magazine promos. So they weren't legal in tournament because they were very hard to get. With the reprint set that's coming out, that was the first time they became legal. They were reprinted, they were handed out to the community. Hey, these are legal in tournaments now. So not only am I excited to see where Japan takes those tournament cards, but I feel like it's a terrible time to hit Melga on any card from the promos. So I think Melga, Where Garurumon X, that one being restricted for the next regional was coming up with like the different rule set. That was one that kind of took me off guard because I expected it to be Melga X itself. Because it's banning a $5 card versus banning like a $15 card in the Garurumon or like a $10 card in the other one, and to a region who just got it and just paid for it. So I think it made more sense for me to like hit Melga X because it's like, $5 card, whatever. You're going to put it into other decks or you're just going to choose a different top end. There'll be stuff for it later, so you hit the deck for a bit, people stop whining about it. But I don't even know if I don't know if it had a big enough representation to get hit. And then my biggest problem with restricted lists is everyone calls for Death X. Everyone wants Death X head, but if we limit it to 1, we do nothing to it. It still sits at 1 in most decks, and that's it. And then even that's so few people used it.
Yeah.
Is it that strong? Are we just not playing around it like with Yu-Gi-Oh and like Mystic Mine or Skill Drain? Like, is this just a format problem we know about and we just have to play around? And not to say it's the fault of, but most people would say, hey, it's your fault if you put nothing in it to get you out of that situation if you could be running outs. And I think the only other thing on like the whole card list I expect to potentially get hit would be something from the Beelzemon deck. I feel like we're about to see so much support. I think we're going to see like so much stuff coming out for it. I don't know what. I don't have a precise target hit, but I think something in that deck is going to get touched.
Yeah, I think my response to that is it's two layered. Okay, and I look at it like this when I think of any type of ban list or restricted list, and it's tough because I always try to like look back on what has been, banned or restricted or whatever the case is. But at the same time, somebody made a really good point to me at like some point that you can't really compare one card to another. Like if we're talking about card A that has been restricted, then because this card got restricted because it does this, then this card by default should be restricted, right? And their point to me, and I felt like it was very very intuitive, was we're not talking about what the card does in that specific deck. It's what that card does to the game as a whole, and what it presents as a potential issue going forward. So I'll use Crossheart as an example, right? We got Cross 4 hit immediately right after the deck pretty much came out, right? At the time, I didn't understand why. Now I do. Could you imagine if you could run 4 Cross 4s in this deck right now, on top of all the other support that you have? The deck would be absolutely asinine, right? So it's things like that. But then when you want to talk about, and that's like deck specific things, I'll say the same thing. I'm always going to be sad until they ever bring it back, Jet Sylphimon. But Jet Sylphimon arguably made Yellow Hybrid the best deck in the format because a 1-cost non-conditional recover 1, still keeping turn, like that's crazy, right? But then you want to venture out and look at, okay, all of the things that they're talking about, a potential, we want to see this ban, we want to see this limited or whatever. I think we've had 3 big targets, and all 3 of them hit. Well, actually, maybe 4, but they all really just target down Black War. I've heard Cool Boy, I've heard the Greymon X, and I've heard Hades Force. Right, those 3 cards. Okay, I look at this. Yes, sure, they limited Sunrise Buster, and that's why people are trying to make the justification for Hades Force. But Hades Force is so, and we've talked about this. I know Agent and I have talked about this a lot. Is Hades Force is so much more conditional than Sunrise Buster, where it's like Sunrise Buster enables just about anything, can be a 5-cost, remove anything on your board, and I'm playing a Tamer basically for free. Whereas Hades Force, I have to have my big body out first. I pay 5 for it, realistically. Then I pay another 5 to go into my... I'm giving you 10 memory to blow up your board to give you a chance to build it back up. So it's like, there's a little bit of a balance there, right? Sunrise Buster is not balanced at all. As much as I hated seeing that card go, I can understand why. I think personally, the biggest issue we have in the format right now currently is the same issue that we had from BT7 all the way into arguably BT9, which is like in BT7, it was, or BT6, sorry, it was hybrid or whatever. It was BT7 hybrids, right?
7.
Hybrids, 7. Hybrids everywhere. They didn't go away. It was when Jet Sylphie got hit. It was when Tommy got hit. Is when we finally saw hybrids fade away because they got nerfed, basically, right? What are we seeing right now is X antibody decks in some shape or form run everything. Okay, well then how do we address that problem? You have 2 things. Cool Boy, X antibody. I agree with Agent. If you limit X antibody the option, that doesn't really do anything. Grandis doesn't even run it, really. Some decks that want to see it don't even really need to in some cases. I think it's honestly Cool Boy. Cool Boy is the one thing that, enables so much. It allows you to, and it's like, people are like, well, if you do it to Cool Boy, it like nerfs everything. It's like, but that's the whole point. You want to kind of bring it back in and not make it to where it's just this X antibody majority field, So I personally think, people were talking about, oh, Grand Kawagama. I don't think you need to touch Grandis at all. Where was it? I think it's fine personally.
It's honestly the most honest OTK deck. No protection.
Yes,
I'm just big. I'm going to hit you.
Yep, I 100% agree. So, anyways, I'll wrap up my rant here by just saying that I think we can project all day long. I know we did in the first episode too, kind of touching on ban list, restricted list, and everything, because it's always going to be relevant in our game, right? Because there's always going to be ebbs and flows with it. But I think currently what we're seeing, what we're called for is, if we want to see the game continue to adapt and evolve, we have to figure out a way. The game has to figure out a way to get people out of playing the strongest archetypes. And right now, and for the longest time since BT9, it's been X antibody archetypes. What's the card that enables it the most? It's Cool Boy.
But yeah, no, to you guys' point with the ban list, yeah, it's a very interesting discussion, I think. Because for me, the only thing that makes sense is Cool Boy. Everything else feels too surgically specific, because I don't think people are considering, well, what's the future of the game? Dan, you brought up the whole thing about, okay, but Cross 4, right? It's Cross 4 that got limited. Well, yeah, next set or the set after, whatever, this set that we're in right now basically would have taken that deck to tier 0, no contests, insta win, right? Yep. And I think that even when you look at BT12, BT13, and EX4, which we already have visibility into, you can see why certain things would or wouldn't be banned because of the amount of support that it's getting. And if you guys haven't looked at, not y'all as in Dan and Frawley, but for you guys watching / listening, have not looked into EX4 or BT12 or BT13, if you're a Greymon fan or any protagonist Digimon, you gonna be eating good for like the next couple of months. That's, yeah.
Yeah.
Parallel worlds.
it's gonna look real good for you.
No.
You're
good. So, just to talk ban list, to wrap up, I think Dan made a great point. The last time when they made bans, they did a whole breakdown of it, like the why. And I think you nailed it, where it's like, we thought Calling from Darkness was too detrimental. We thought you get too many free summons with Eismon. Crossheart 4 just too strong. This is a future proofing. They did the same thing to Hidden Potential Discovered. We didn't even have the card before that they got limited. So I would really like them to at least break down why they ban what they ban, so we have more insight into this. Because either they ban, it's limited. Either they limit something, ban something, or they print cards against it. Digimon, like, hey, I'm blocking memory gain. Hey, I'm blocking the fact that you can't play Digimon by effects. Crimson Blaze, they still hate Rookie Rush. They will print stuff against things, which is weird. I feel like that's almost when you have a seal of approval, where they're like, okay, we don't, like, this deck is very, very good. Now we have to print answers to it. We don't have to kill it, because we still think it's performing just overly. We could print some like hate against it. Like with Tamers now, like getting more removal or bouncing Tamers because they're becoming too good a resource to be able to leave on field.
Yep, 100%.
I would like to them to potentially experiment with 2 copies of something. I feel like at that point your ban list your restricted list gets way wider as we go, okay, you're only allowed 2 of these, okay, you're only allowed 2 of these, and this will cut a bunch of archetypes down, but might make the meta more healthy. But I do think we start straying into some Yu-Gi-Oh territory of like, we have a lot of stuff on ban list.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting if they did like a semi-limited, which I think is what Yu-Gi-Oh calls it, to reduce those down. And also, like, to your point, Frawley, I didn't even think about this. Like, yeah, Hades Force is actually the perfect example of like, we're gonna put an answer to Cross in the set. However, you got to be playing Greymon. If you're not playing Greymon, it don't matter. So very interesting. But we're talking about future sets from other card games that you guys have played. We've all played different things. Is there like a mechanic or maybe multiple mechanics that you would like to see get introduced into Digimon at some point, and why?
I'll say this off of my longtime game of Pokemon, and it's more of, I would say, more of a newer mechanic in terms of like the entire longevity of the game. But I mean, it's been out for a while now. Is the Lost Zone. And I know Yu-Gi-Oh has this. I think it's called the Banish Zone or whatever. Yeah, so it's something like that. But not just to have that zone for the zone's sake. to obviously gain resources off of it. If you have, like, there was a deck, I'll just give a quick example. Like with Pokemon, there was a deck that for every certain type of Pokemon you had in the Lost Zone, your attack did 20 times that amount of damage. So if you had 10 in there, it'd do 200 damage, right? And it'd be like a cheap, really like 1 energy attachment type of thing. So it was like a really low maintenance kind of like, it was just a cool interaction, and it offered, like you said, a different mechanic, but more so like an additional zone to the field of like, and it's almost not, it's pretty much non-interactable, right? Because we all know that regardless of what it's called across whatever game, once the cards go there, they're not recoverable like they are in your trash or your deleted pile, whatever. Like they're gone. You know, so I think the cool thing about that, to kind of wrap that up, is that it also adds another element to the game of resource management, right? Like purple players, I'll throw anything in my trash because I know I'll get it back at some point, right? But if I'm throwing stuff into a banish zone, I have to be real careful what I put there because I'll never see it again. So I think it would maybe hopefully add a different skill element to the game if Digimon were to introduce something similar to that. It doesn't have to be obviously on the same scope as the other games to try to give some type of diversity, but I do think that would be kind of a cool little additive to add to the game.
Just for quick clarification and to expand on that, is Pokemon's banish zone only for your side? Like, are you banishing your opponent's stuff, or are you banishing your stuff?
As far as I know, Pokemon right now only has it to where I only banish my stuff. So like I have a card where like I can play it, Lost Zone one of my things to like discard something of yours. But as far as I know, I'm sure there's got to be maybe one or two things, but the majority of everything it's only mine, and only my Lost Zone counts towards the Lost Zone counter. So like, if there's a total of like, the Lost Zone isn't a shared space, right. So it's not like if you have 10 cards, I have 10 cards. It's not like there's 20 cards in the Lost Zone. I only count mine. So if I need 10 to add to enable an effect on my side, I need to figure out a way to get 10 in there. So, and that could be another thing, with Pokemon. For those who don't know too much about that game, because I know we primarily talk about Digimon, Pokemon is not a very interactable game in that in regard to like how Digimon is, where it's like a lot of back and forth. So I think it might be cool that if Digimon to keep on par with what they do in the interactability between players is maybe they do have a shared like banish zone or something where maybe not to where like I can pick up my opponent's cards and use them, but like counts or something matter, and they're like, oh, if there's a certain amount, because then that just adds to the interaction of like, oh, I'm going to enable one of my opponent's effects if I add this card in here, but I kind of need to add this card. So it kind of working with the whole memory gauge, like I need to play this, but I'm going to give my opponent too much memory. So I think it kind of fits into that entire mold of like how Digimon plays as an entire card game. I think it'd be kind of cool.
For sure. I would say I know Dragon Ball has the drop, which is the banish zone. Oh, yeah. Sorry, the warp. And that's a sister card game. So I've been hoping for a banish zone too. But like Yu-Gi-Oh, if we go the Yu-Gi-Oh route of like my opponent is banishing my stuff, but there's also archetypes that play around banishing stuff of their own on purpose. It could be dual purpose, which I think would be really cool. Purple should be warping your stuff, but like maybe some of the other colors can like warp their own things.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I was gonna, the warping thing, the banish, the remove from game zone, Lost Zone, whatever we want to call it, is something that, yeah, I've talked about too. Of like that would be really interesting. I don't know how that would work, literally because of purple. But to your point, Frawley, like if purple can like recycle stuff from in Dragon Ball, you have the overwhelm mechanic where you take your drop zone, you put it in the warp, you take all the cards in your drop, you put it in your warp, and you get to play some powerful dude for the turn, and then it goes away. But there are a lot of cards that have like this cyclical relationship, cat just doing something crazy, that have a cyclical relationship with one another where you can take stuff from your warp, put it in your drop, and vice versa. For me, though, mechanic-wise, I kind of, and maybe this is too Yu-Gi-Oh, and I don't know how this would work, I kind of want there to be some kind of like counterplay mechanic to where like, this is a thing in Dragon Ball that's been really fascinating to kind of get used to. So you have like counterattack. So let's say somebody swings at you, you pay X, in Dragon Ball it's energy, which is basically mana, and you can play a card that will negate the attack, and the attack's over. Because of the memory system, I don't really know how that would work, of like how you'd pay the cost of a counter card, but it could be interesting to have like, okay, somebody hard slams a Digimon, but you can counter the play and just get rid of it, and you pay X. the memory counter makes that awkward because it's your opponent's turn. So I don't know how you'd pay for it, whether that be by discarding cards from the top of your deck or whatever. But that's what I kind of would like to see, is some kind of counter mechanic.
Are you asking for hand traps? We're
A
gonna
little
ban.
bit. A little
just
bit.
about to say
I
that. I
know.
was like,
People are gonna be like, no.
tread
no.
carefully. Tread
Look,
carefully.
Look. I'm just saying
Next
that,
thing
like,
he's gonna be saying, I want an XYZ zone and stuff. Pendulum.
We already do. That's Digicross.
Yeah.
look. Yeah, I know people are gonna be like, "Can't get rid of Agent. We don't like him no more because he's talking about hand traps." I'm just saying that, like, certain things in moderation could be cool. Like, let's say it's a white card, or like a specific color that it's not prolific through, everything, but it could be fun. I don't know. Maybe y'all are like, no.
I almost think when you're talking about the memory mechanic, it would as long as it benefited your opponent. Like, what if you had a card in hand where it's like, for Magic they're called instants. So sorceries could be interrupted, instances just happen. So if you had something in your hand where it's like instant, and you're like, hey, I'm gonna give you 3 memory, but I'm going to do something to your board. I'm going to stun something, I'm going to bounce something, I'm going to whatever, but you get 3 memory for me doing it. Like, I have to pay you memory, keep your turn going, and sacrifice a card from hand. But it might be beneficial for me doing so.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just a thought. And it's probably because I've been playing so much Dragon Ball recently that my brain's like, oh, this could be kind of cool. I just don't know how the hell it would work. But yeah.
Counterattacking that game is very interesting. So I haven't been playing the card game that my mechanic's from. But I really like the idea of dredging. So dredging is from Hearthstone, and dredging was a mechanic where you basically would play or would be able to draw the card from the bottom of your deck. So we don't have tutors in this game. A tutor, for those who don't know, is a card that allows you to go through your deck, search your deck for a card, and pull it out. All of our tutoring is off top of deck. We search top X number of cards, we check for X and X, and we may take both or take one, depending on the card. In that respect, I think a dredge card would be so interesting to be like, I know what I just bought decked. I need that back. Oh my god, hey. I feel like it could save some games. I feel like some people would get annoyed because it's almost like top decking, because you check it, you know it, you stack it, so it's like it's the bottomest card.
Right.
But that leads to more play with the mechanic of like, put the cards at the bottom of your deck in any order. I don't think about that. I put cards at bottom of deck. I don't even look half the time. But if I actually had a reason, I was doing this with Dorbrickmon, where I was actually placing a level 5, like 3 or 4 down, so that way if I got de-digivolved, I'd still be level 5.
Yep.
And it made me think. So I think something like a dredge mechanic where I can play a searcher, I miss one of the cards I really need, I play a card to be able to draw that card from the bottom of the deck, and I'm learning a mechanic part of a game that's already part of the game but not being as utilized.
That would be super interesting. Not to say that I already want to errata my mind, but like tagging onto that, something else I had talked about before was like, I would love a freaking shuffle mechanic. Like, I don't care if it's just like draw one card, shuffle, like some reason to shuffle my deck and maybe my opponent's. Because, like, if you had a dredge mechanic, being able to forcibly shuffle your opponent's deck would actually be super interesting, right? Because then you kind of, like, keep interacting with each other past even what's on the board. So yeah, I mean, if I had to choose, because, look, y'all might be like, Agent in these hand traps, we don't like this man no more. If I had to choose, it would probably be, like really, like, shuffle. Like, shuffle, I think, is the biggest thing that I would just... I don't even care what makes it happen. I just want to be able to shuffle, especially when I'm playing Jesmon.
Yeah, I think to your point, like, you bring up a really good point in that is, because comparing again, my only real reference point is Pokemon, and Pokemon obviously we all know has, well, I guess for those who don't, but Pokemon has the searchability factor of it, right? Like, there's cards in the game right now that's basically like, discard a card from your hand, search your deck for something, whatever, pull it out and use it, right? If Digimon had something like that, the game I honestly would think would just become degenerate. It's because it's not balanced in that way, but similarly to that, whereas Pokemon is obviously, if I search through my deck and I'm going through, I pull out what I need, I can't just put my deck down because I know what the order is. I have to, by default, I have to shuffle it. So yeah, Agent, to your point, I think maybe not having the searchability factor but like something where, oh, I played something down, search top 3, pick out what I want. We could still have our same search mechanics because I think that's fine. But if we're not going to have, and I don't want to get into this because this is a whole other topic, but if we're not going to have mulligans like really implemented, then I don't disagree that a shuffle mechanic in some way, maybe you're like, it's like a timeout system in football or something, like you're only limited to like 3 per game or something. Like there's a way to balance it, right? Like in some way, like there's I don't know. There's so many different ways, like routes you can take, but I agree with you that some of these decks that struggle so much because of bad variance, if you just had a way to shuffle your deck once, maybe twice a game or even a match, could mean a world of difference instead of just draw level 5, draw level 5, draw level 6, 3 options in my hand. Like I just can't play the game, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be a cool one too.
Cool. Well, unless anybody has any other additions, I think we can move to the final piece of the podcast, which we'll be doing every episode, which Frolly, I'll let you introduce it since it was your idea.
So I had this thing. We've been talking a lot about ban lists, and something always akin to the ban list you have to pay attention to is the errata lists. And erratas is taking a card, changing the card text because either we printed it wrong or we didn't clarify something correctly. So I would like to welcome you to our errata zone, in which case we could take back any take we want and represent it to the class. This is our way for getting clicks off you for when you say we have a bad take, and we can come back at you. In this case, I'm correcting the worst jerk in the comments, myself. I talked about last week we were talking about how to get in the game. It's our addition, like our first podcast, and we really wanted to like nail new beginnings for people. And the booster box way has been my way the entire time of the game. In fact, the double booster box way is what I always advocated for. And then buying singles, because you would get most of the pieces you needed, you would have other pieces to trade, and you, for the most part, were pretty much done the set. This box, I recommended you buy, and I don't think it's a bad box, because secrets seem to be falling out of these things. But your amount of value you're getting out of your box was lesser, due to the fact that we're no longer getting 2 rares per pack. The old minimum was 2 rares per pack. This allowed you to clear up a set pretty quickly, and I think they're doing this to like, because they were like, oh, like pack incentives aren't there, but they've just added in the gold cards, and they've been adding in these set hits, and I think that's enough. I do think though us getting common and uncommon rares brings us in line with our sister game of Dragon Ball, where it's like, hey, you're a real card game now, you're gonna have to buy a couple boxes. Which is unfortunately what I feel like they're saying. But I wanted to errata myself and say that like always getting the singles for one single deck would be good. I recommend, my point still stands for every box before BT11, but I think going forward we're going to have to readjust, and I'm going to have to come up with a new way of describing like how many boxes, what's the right amount, how do I go locally versus online. But that's my current errata.
Cool. That is valid. Yeah, it is funny because I remember in that episode I was saying, "Oh, it'd be great if we had hollow variants and everything," and now we do. So I don't know how I feel about it yet because I mean I bought my 2 boxes, I got what I needed, so so I was like, whatever.
I think it's a double-edged sword in that, like, to like what you were saying for all this, it's like it makes the whole like buying boxes as a good strategy to entry into the game kind of awkward. But for us who want to have shiny versions of decks that a common or uncommon typically doesn't have a max rarity version, I can pick up a 25-cent or 50-cent more expensive version of the card, and now everything in the deck is shiny. So I think to your point, like I think we get down to the semantics of like specific quantities of things versus what really we're trying to get at. But yeah, I agree with you. It's just and myself included. When we're talking about things like that, it's just I think the intention there was just like overall, it's a positive. Like it's a good way to try to get in and just kind of get the bulk of what you need.
Yeah. Yep. All right, y'all. Well, thank you for tuning in to episode 2. This is looking like it's going to be a monthly thing, so we'll see you guys in April. Who knows, we might do something in between, but we'll see y'all in the next episode in April. And really appreciate everybody taking a listen. And anybody got any closing statements before we hit that red button?
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Remember to use your resources. Good luck pulling on packs, and take care.
Keep it short and simple. Get out there and play. Start the game. And like Frawley said, I appreciate everybody. Thank you again. I'm just going to keep reiterating to Agent every time. Thank you for having me on here. It's a huge honor to be invited back on. So love being here. Appreciate you guys.
This guy, you'll be invited every time. You know what I mean? So,
I'm gonna say it every time.
Well, welcome back, y'all. If you haven't noticed, I like putting Dan on the spot. You know what I mean? So, anyway, guys, we'll see you in the next episode. Peace.
Later.